ஐயா அப்பா அப்பா ரசம் அப்பா முருகா முருகா ரசம்
So, what do you find in common or interesting? Let's start there. Hannah, what do you think? Different. That's a nice way of putting it. Well, specifically, what's different?
Well, the second one, they had a pop up and taking pictures with him, and like he was kind of competing with like a glue or something.
Okay.
I know, like in the Middle East countries, like the glue and the bride and the glue, they prop them up on like chairs and they carry them and stuff. Or like a wedding.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so they were like almost like praising the dead, right? Taylor, what you think? What was weird about it? It's definitely, if you're from a Western tradition, it's just probably pretty different than what you
Well, the first time we
experienced.
like burned them all together. The second one we like did it just him.
The second one, did they burn the body?
No.
Yeah. So the ideal is cremation. Certainly there are exceptions. And, I couldn't figure out why that they don't burn the body. Usually, exception would be for a child. And the rationale is if it's a young child and hasn't accumulated bad karma, so there's no need to burn the body. I'm not sure why that is. I bet you there's some sort of something to do with the politics there in that particular village. What else did you notice? Who's involved? Yeah.
It was like loud, and funerals here are quiet and
Quiet, somber, right? They're jamming in there. There's drums, and they're yelling, they're arguing against each other, they're arguing with each other. Some are crying, some are happy. Yeah, good. Yeah, that's a good point, right? So even the firstborn son, who's basically the leader in this particular tradition, he's wearing what? What color? White. You know, imagine if you went to one of your family members' funeral with a white dress on, right? I mean, when do you wear white in Western society? A wedding, right? You know, here it's very, very different. White's a sign of purity. What else did you notice about the son? Shaves his head. Why? Huh? It kind of, yeah, good sign of mourning, right? What else does the sun do?
Walk around 5 times.
Very good. With what?
The sacred fire.
Well, the first one.
That was the first
The
one.
second one was like some water or
Yeah.
So
something.
again, various traditions, and when we look at the major tradition, there are some there are some variations. But oldest son, he's going to walk around the body, and specifically, it's thought that when you die, your soul remains in the body, and in order. So number one, you want to protect the soul against demons, against bad forces that might take the soul, to give it a bad rebirth or take it to a realm where you don't want that soul to go. Number two, if you notice, especially in the second one, they break the pot. The breaking of the pot symbolizes, in the early traditions, they'd actually break the skull open. So the breaking the pot symbolizes breaking the skull open, which allows the soul to leave the body and go on to a new rebirth. All of these traditions are specifically geared to help guarantee a good reincarnation for your loved one. And that's something to take into consideration, especially those of you who might be helping out or dealing with a dying Hindu in hospice or in hospitals or hospital setting. Some other points. So the tantra again. Tantra means just the shaving of the head. The face is upward to the sky. Position the head, towards the south. The body will be placed towards the south, and that's done to help Yama, the Lord of Death, come get the soul and bring him to this new realm or new rebirth. Nevertheless, there are 9 main stages. We'll go through real quick of the funeral rite / bereavement. So here we have dying, coping with death, accepting death. We have the actual dying, and then how the bereaved are to respond in this particular tradition. So the first is the preparation for the death. Not uncommon to find a Hindu calling in, the priest, the Brahmin priest. The Brahmin priest comes in, and as an act, he or she, might confess sins. You might be familiar with this from Western tradition. He'll give Brahmin some sort of gift. Traditionally, you'd actually give the Brahmin a cow, right? As an act of, as an alms giving. You're doing a good deed that will help you in the afterlife. But today, that might be simply a golden cow, especially for a Hindu in the West, a Hindu in Buffalo. At the moment of death, so the ideal death is to die with your family. And you might have, so let's say you're a Hindu, it's your family member, might be your father that's dying. You have family members in the room that will be chanting various holy prayers, holy chants. And then right as the person's dying, the priest will be there. And he'll open the mouth and put in water from the river Ganges. The Ganges is very, very important. The holiest river in all of Hinduism. There's some Hindus today that would say you can't be a Hindu unless you live, in India. Now, not all would agree to that, but the point is that in India, Hinduism is very much tied to the country of India itself. They'd also put within the mouth a basil plant, a leaf of a basil plant, which is known as a tulsi plant. One of the challenges you might have in dealing with a Hindu patient is it's very, very important. Very, very important for a devout Hindu to have this particular ritual done. That ritual is not done, that can have negative effects on the reincarnation. So we have cases where a family member died in the hospital before the family could get there with a priest. And what do you do with a dead body? What do you do with a dead body once a person dies in a hospital? The morgue, right? Can you just walk into the morgue and pull out your loved one? No, you can't. You're not allowed in there. Like, there are locks on the doors, and they wouldn't allow the family to go in there and perform this ritual. And for years afterwards, they mourned their loved one because they thought that now this was detrimental to their afterlife, to their reincarnation. The body itself will be washed and dressed in new clothes, and a coin will be placed into the mouth. Where else do we find that?
Greeks.
Yeah, so the ferryman's as it appears in this tradition as well. The mourners circumambulate the body, which simply means walk around in circles. And we'll see that very few will touch the dead body. Because the body is impure, and touching the body makes you impure. And in fact, at the end of the funeral ritual, there will be there will be a ritual of cleansing that you saw in the second video. Everyone goes into the river and cleans themselves off, getting off the impurity of the dead. In fact, during this time of contact with the dead, you're not allowed in the temple until you've gone through this cleansing process. So the procession to the cremation grounds. The ideal is to process with the body in an open casket. Interesting enough, this has come under fire, this particular tradition, especially in the U.S./Canada. Why might this be a problem, driving down the road with an open casket?
There's my gift freaked out by it.
How many of you would want to see someone's dead grandma, driving, in an open casket, being paraded down the road? Right? Would you? Seriously?
What did she fill out?
I don't think it would bother me.
Wouldn't bother you? You wouldn't bother by it. Some people are, right? So there are laws in place that do not allow these types of things.
I feel like that might be a major problem.
Like in the incident of like a car accident or even a fender bender, then it would be a problem, I'm sure.
Okay, do you see all the mangled body?
Yeah.
The kid, as they're processing with the body, they'll make several stops along the way. I don't know about you, but I'm from a Western tradition, and I remember my grandmother died. We drove past, her church, her home. Does anyone participate in a custom like that? Yeah. Okay. So, anyone else? I think this is fairly common, especially for more traditional folks. And then we have the creation of these rice balls. We'll talk more about these pindas. And the belief is that the creation of these will help the dead in the afterlife, and will protect the spirit of the dead as you're going through this process. So the process of dying is very, very dangerous for the spirit. And so you want to help that spirit have the best possible rebirth. Just keep that in the back of your mind. So we get to Buddhism. Buddhism picks this up. And then we get to Tibetan Buddhism. And Tibetan Buddhism, they really stress that particular aspect. We have a whole mortuary text on this, but we'll get to that. At the cremation grounds. So by the way, interesting enough, so the ideal death is a cremation. Do we allow open air cremations in Buffalo?
No.
You said no? Right? So this is another debate today. So for a devout Hindu, you have to be cremated, right? Would you want? Are you infringing upon a Hindu's right if you don't allow them to cremate their bodies outside?
I think so. That's the
Yeah. How many of you agree? How many of you think it's perfectly fine for this is an old religious ritual for Hindus to cremate their loved ones on an open fire? No one raising their hand. Huh? Yeah.
I think they should have it could be outside, but a specific place, because no one wants to be walking their kids down the street, and then someone's burning a dead body, and then you have to explain to your kid why they're doing
Or the
that.
zombie apocalypse.
So you'd be okay with that?
If it was in a specific place.
Okay, so there's a specific place. All right, let's say they have a plot of land, specific place. So what happens when you burn a body? Yeah, you smell the cooking of human flesh. You can be okay with that?
live downwind?
What if you live downwind, right?
It's an infringement, but it's also.
Is it an infringement or what?
But
Yeah,
what?
but
So this is where church and state might butt heads a little bit.
This is like an infringement with people saying you have to wear a seatbelt or you have to.
You think so?
Because it's the law, but people argue, well, it's my right, I'm choosing to drive and I want to do
So you
this.
have
But
to
at the
take into
same time,
account-
you have to take into account everyone else who's affected by that.
Yes.
I just think it's an infringement only because it's like a religious issue, and we can't just say like we're a country who's just like open to all religions if we limit everyone like the way they can practice their religious beliefs. So I think it's a big infringement.
So for many Hindus today, not all, but for many Hindus today, this is a problem, especially for Hindus. So many, remember, we're talking about Hindus in this country. Majority of Hindus in this country come from India. So they're coming with these knowledge of these traditions, and they're like, well, this is part of our tradition. Why can't we have this open, pure fire where we burn our loved ones? For many Americans, they're like, no, I don't want to deal with smelling, the flesh of your loved one being roasted. Not to be crude, but yeah. So this is again one of some of these issues to take into account. So today, most cremations would occur in a crematory. Yeah.
That's what I was gonna ask. So do they let them do it like in the crematory or?
Well, yes, but then it's not an. So depending upon the Hindu family, they may not be too happy with that, specifically because it's not open. It's not an open fire. It's against that tradition.
What is it like? The smoke has to go up, or something?
That's part of it, absolutely. Yes. Okay.
Well, no, people have barbecues in their backyard, and if I eat meat, if I don't eat meat, that might offend me. But I
If
can't
they put
steal
some barbecue sauce on the bodies first and then burn them, it would be better.
I had coffee. I'm always I don't know. I mean, lots of people do weird things we don't agree with. I thought it was weird when I was in the hospital and the patient died. Their family was sitting there eating crackers for 2 hours, just chatting. And it's like, we need to take care of this. Like, leave.
Okay.
So everybody has their own.
Yeah, it's a fair point, right?
Yeah.
Lots of things we can't make everyone happy.
Yeah.
But no, just be aware of this discussion. Yeah.
I guess it kind of would be a fire hazard, especially in the city, like the city of Buffalo. Your body would burn down the neighborhood. So I mean,
I learned the hard way. You're not allowed to have fires in the city of Buffalo. You can't make a.
Really? I don't even know.
You can't make like a little fire pit or anything.
they're so close.
No, you can't. You definitely cannot do that. It is illegal. I learned that. Trust me. Trust me on this one. This would be an example of an ideal cremation.
So I have no experience.
Now, the ashes. What do you do with the ashes? So, in Hinduism, in Hindu tradition, and by the way, I think this is, for all the traditions we're looking at, those that allow cremation, it's not considered appropriate to put the ashes of your loved one in a urn and leave it on your, the mantle of your fireplace. In this particular tradition, you want to deposit those ashes into a river. The ideal would be the Ganges River, the holiest river. Remember, you saw in that first video, there's some traditions that you believe if once you're cremated and your body is thrown into the Ganges, your ashes are deposited into the Ganges. I mean, you're going to have you may be liberated from that. It's kind of like a loophole. It's a way out of the reincarnation process. So it's not uncommon for a loved one after their, and I knew of someone whose son died, and he died, suddenly, and she wanted to make sure that he had a good rebirth, or perhaps liberated. So she brought the ashes all the way to India, right? From the East Coast, she flew all the way to India. She came to the Ganges, performed a specific ritual with the local Brahmin priest, and then she deposited the ashes into the Ganges, right? If you're ever in India, don't drink the water from the Ganges. So why is the Ganges so holy? The Ganges, in some traditions, is actually a goddess. There are various stories. One story is that the Lord Vishnu, this god Vishnu, he punched a hole in heaven, with his toe on accident, and the waters from the heaven came to lie on the earth, and that is the Ganges. So these are the heavenly waters. In other traditions, it is believed that Ganges is a goddess, and there's one specific festival during the year where it's believed that this goddess, ascends from heaven. And the Ganges itself, so it's not only is the Ganges the goddess itself, but she goes up and down from heaven. The belief is if you're there during the celebration, the negative effects of your karma are wiped out. And it happens somewhere around late May, early June. And she'll take away all your sins. And then boom, you have a clean slate. For many Hindus, they would simply say the idea would be to deposit the ashes into any river, because all rivers eventually lead to the Ganges. And finally, we come to the Shraddha ritual. And this has to do with bereavement. There are 3 rituals for bereavement itself, and they usually occur they begin occurring between 10 to 11 days after the funeral. You have the creation of these rice balls or pindas. And the rice balls are there, if the spirit is still there, to rest, to come into these pindas, right? And the goal again is to prevent the spirit from turning into a preta, or a ghost, right? Day 11, you're performing these rituals, you're saying these prayers that are continuing to help the spirit to be nourished, to prepare for this journey to the afterlife. And then you have on day 12 this particular ritual. And in this ritual, you are transforming the spirit who's in this preta, who's in this rice ball, into an ancestral ghost, right? It's kind of like in the Egyptian religion where we get to the weighing of the heart, right? If you pass the weighing of the heart, you become, an ancestral spirit. You become this Ak, right? Whereas before you're not an Ak, you're just a Ba. And they mix these various rice balls together, which symbolizes the spirit becoming an ancestral ghost. And that concludes the mourning period. And once that occurs, you have to do various ritual cleansings, which might entail going to the Ganges and cleansing yourself, if you happen to be in the area. On the anniversary of the dead, you would repeat this Shraddha ritual. So you don't know. So no, not to my knowledge, I'm not aware of this. But within the Hindu tradition, there is not clarity on when exactly the reincarnation process takes place. And even if it has taken place by performing this ritual on the anniversary of the dead, you are helping them, in their next life. They're doing this blessing. And this is an example of what the pindas look like. This would be a Brahmin priest, and he's performing the ritual as seen here and here. Just real quick. So care for the dying. I should stop there. Any questions first before we go on? Let's look at the 9 aspects of this dying and bereavement / mourning process.
What was 9?
9 was the Shraddha ritual. The annual Shraddha ritual. Yeah. Right here. Just see one more time. Number 1, because the eldest son is the person in charge, or the eldest, or if there isn't a son, the eldest family member, you're dealing with a devout Hindu, specifically someone from India, you want to make sure you address that member. If it is a male, particularly the oldest son, do not make eye contact. Does that sound kind of weird? Right? Well, think about it. Maybe some of you are from, I used to do missionary work with a Hispanic community in Chicago. And one thing I learned was that I was causing some problems. Because when I would talk to these kids, which was one particular kid, was always causing trouble. It was a camp counselor basically, and I would say to him, "No, look at me when I'm talking to you," because coming from my tradition, a Western tradition, when you're talking to someone, you make eye contact, right? And then someone pulled me aside and said, listen, Walter, in this particular tradition, a sign of respect is to look down. Eye contact is a sign of disrespect. Similar to this as well. Eye contact can be seen as a sign of disrespect. Generally speaking, the dying, so the eldest son is making the call. Generally speaking, they're going to avoid advanced directives. You're not going to have a living will, and they're not going to be open to that. And there's a reason for that. And that has to do with the Hindu concept of reincarnation. For a Hindu, the reincarnation process is supposed to be a process of suffering, right? It's supposed to be painful. It comes with the territory. So they see suffering as a positive. And it's also, by suffering, it's an opportunity to atone for your bad karma. So for devout Hindus, they're looking at this as, especially for those who might have a long drawn-out illness, cancer patient. They might be saying this, and they might say to you, I want to avoid palliative care or certain forms of palliative care so that I can experience the suffering solely for the purpose of atoning for my bad actions. That being the case, generally speaking, Hindus will not pursue aggressive treatments. Why? Because if I'm suffering has a reason. And the reason is I'm being prepared for a good reincarnation, or perhaps liberating myself from the process of liberation, from the process of reincarnation. At the same time, we look at issues of euthanasia. A devout Hindu will want nothing to do with that. Why? Because suffering is a positive, it's a part of the reincarnation process. If you end your life quickly, you're going to incur bad karma. You're interfering with this natural process. Now, I should mention that in India, they don't consider this euthanasia. When we look at some Buddhism, some Chinese Buddhists, they have a similar practice where a person who is dying and they know they're going to die, they'll begin this religious fast to death, right? But they wouldn't consider that. They consider this a form of asceticism, almost like a Yama Marga, following this path of knowledge and control of the body, where they would actually fast to death. This is not common, but it does happen. For caregivers then, for many of you, just understand, and much of this is just applying what we learned at first class on the various ideas that Charles Core had for hospice workers. Death for a Hindu is not an individual experience. It's a family and communal experience. For that reason, a Hindu would generally opt for hospice care, and in particular hospice care that will allow them to be at home. And so even if that means their life will not be prolonged because they don't have that technology, they're willing to do that if that means they can be at home with their loved ones and die in the presence of the eldest son, of the family, of the local priest. You can help them, even if you don't believe in any of this, to atone for the bad karma, and that's simply just supporting their choices to forgo treatments. They might do some strange things as, even though they need to eat, they might say, I'm going to fast from my meal. You want to support those decisions. That's being made from a devout religious conviction. And putting them in touch with local communities, in temples. Right? Does anyone know what a local temple here, or Hindu community is?
There's one isn't there a place of worship on Transit Road?
Yes. I don't know exactly where it is, but there's one in Williamsville.
It's near Clarence. It's on the Clarence-Williamsville.
Okay, so it's actually in Williamsville, and apparently I just learned about this. There's a second temple I guess the one in Williamsville is more of a cultural center, but it does have a temple complex. and then there's another one in East Amherst. And so there is a large Hindu community here in Western New York. And of course, it's very, very important for you to help the dying, and you can do this by allowing for them to place this tulsi leaf in the mouth. Yeah?
What remains is it like taboo to have like an autopsy done?
Well, to an extent, they would not be comfortable with, the Hindus would not be comfortable with autopsy. Many of their religions, I mean, we'll talk about Islam. Islam is not Buddhism. Wouldn't be appropriate either. I mean, in Hinduism, if it's needed, absolutely required, yes, but generally speaking, no. And part of the reason is because there's a time for bereavement. There's a limit in some sense. And you want to make sure that spirit gets out of that body, as soon as possible in the best way possible. So if you're taking an autopsy that takes a few more days, that could be detrimental. When you get to Judaism, where it has to be done within a specific time limit, like within 24 hours, the actual burial, autopsies are very, very problematic for a Jew. Any other questions or comments? Well, the majority of us are here now, so I'm done. Why don't you take this last 10 minutes to get with your groups that you're working with for the final presentation. Just share your emails, contact information that you can contact them later on in the semester. If you are not in a group, feel free to leave. Have a great day. I'll see you on Tuesday. And Tuesday we have our next set of questions. Oh, before you go, real quick, for Buddhism, I'm having you reading, in addition to the readings from the Obayashi book, this particular sutra from Buddha, and it's difficult. I'll try to find a better translation, but just be aware that this particular translation, Nibbana, is Nirvana. The Sangha is the monastic community, and the people that are around Buddha are actually various monks. So the names would be a little bit different than probably what you're accustomed to, but do your best with it. This is probably one of the hardest readings that you'll do for this course this semester. But it's also one of the holiest texts in all of Buddhism itself.
Oh, I see my truck right there.
I didn't even know.
I will. My truck looks like it's